afternoon. Thank you all for joining me here today. Today's professional development is going to be fairly short, maybe 15-20 minutes. I'm going to let you get back to your room. I know you got a lot of things to get done in your conference time, and I don't want to take up all your conference time. But when we did a survey last month asking you all what kind of professional development you'd like, many of you requested centers. The basics on centers, how to use them in your classroom, what you can use them for, how to set them up. So today is going to be part one on that, and we're really going to look at the setup of your centers, some options on how you can use them, and I'll give you a few examples of centers that you can take back and think with you. Take back with you and think about for our next center PD next week. So this one's entitled Stop. It's center time. When we think about centers, the first thing we need to think about is the setup of the centers. How do we want them to look? What are the routines around our centers going to be? What are our expectations for our students and ourselves? How are we going to group our students? How is the rotation going to work? Where are the centers going to be located in our room? How are we going to introduce new centers? And what are our rules going to be about our teacher center? So let's talk about routines for a minute. In everything we do in our classroom, there's a routine. When the kids come in the morning, they have a routine. They come in, they hang their backpacks up, they sit down at their desk. Or they come in, they put away their homework folders, and they sit on the rug. You have a morning routine in place in your classroom. Well, for centers, you also have to establish a routine. For example, if you have mobile centers, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute, where do those centers go when they're done? The children are done with them. Where do the children get the center from when they want to start with them? So you have to think through how you want these centers to look in your room. And almost equally as important is, what are your expectations for your students in the centers? Are they supposed to work alone? Is it a collaborative? Are they supposed to move from center to center whenever they want? Or are you going to set up the time on when to move centers? There are many different ways you can do centers, but you need to think through, what are their voice levels? How do they get help? What kind of movement should you see them going on? And how do the children know when they're successful in these centers? Are the centers going to be graded work, or are they extra practice for the students? So that gives you a little bit to think on expectations and routines, the kind of things you need to be processing for how you want those centers to look in your room. It's not going to look the same in every room. In my room, I can tolerate a little bit more noise and a little bit more movement than Miss Dillard can. Miss Dillard likes the kids in their seats, where they're supposed to be, and being quiet. Me, mine looks like control chaos. So what centers look like in your room is not going to be the same in my room. And the same thing for Miss Shores. Miss Shores is not going to look the same in mine. Every teacher's is going to look a little bit different according to their needs and the needs of their children. So grouping students, we have some options on that. Are you going to group them based on their abilities? Are you going to group your low students with your low students so that you can have leveled centers on their work according to where they are? Or are you going to group the groups high and low so that the high can help the low and the low can help the high, so we can have that going on? Are you going to let them choose their own groups? Are your groups going to stay the same for a grading period or for all year? Or are they going to change every week? So once again, it all depends on what you think is best for your children. Quite often, what I do is I have heterogeneous groups. They're mixed up. They're not based on the ability. I want some high with some low. I want them working together. My centers are set up as a team where they work on a project together in it. They play a game. They do an essay together. They fill in the Mad Libs. As silly as that sounds, Mad Libs is a great part of speech center for students. So that gives you some examples on how the different groups of centers can work. As far as rotation goes, my suggestion would be that you have a rotation schedule figured out for your students, where each group of students spends a certain amount of time in your centers. And that amount of time is going to depend on not only what you have for them in the centers, but really on the time you have set aside in your schedule during centers. Are you doing scheduled centers like you're supposed to be doing during RTI time, where we have that 45-minute block? And in that rotation, is every group going to go to every center every day? Or are they only going to go to 2 centers a day? And then by the end of the week, they will have hit all centers. How do you want that to look in your room? And really, once again, it is a teacher preference, but I strongly recommend, especially if you've never done centers before, that you set up the rotation. Do not let the children choose where they want to go and for how long they want to stay there. When you do that, when you give them that freedom without those limits, quite often you have a lot of chaos and problems. Where if you've set up, okay guys, today we have these 5 centers and I want group 1 and 2 at center 1, group 3 and 4, you're going to be at center 2. You can have that, what I use is like a pocket chart, and my groups were assigned to centers, what center they started at, and it went all the way through the week. So they knew what days they went to what centers at and during which part of the rotation. So think about that. And in centers, when you have the different stations or centers set up, are they going to rotate in a clockwise order? Counterclockwise order? How are they going to rotate within that center? How are they going to know where to go next? That kind of goes back into our expectations when we teach them how the whole process works. The reason I'm spending so much time on this part of the setup of the centers is because if you set it up correctly, centers runs itself. Once you have taught the children your expectations, they know the routines, they know the expectations, then really you're just a facilitator. You're at your horseshoe table, kind of monitoring what's going on in the centers, but you have that time for that small group, that 3 or 4 children, 2 to 4 children, that you're working with on the skills they need. You have that small group time built into your RTI time. So placement of centers. Once again, centers can be what we call mobile or workstations, where you don't have extra tables around your room to actually set up stationary centers. So perhaps on a bookshelf you have shoebox centers, and everything the students need is in that shoebox. And then their desks are in groups, and they each go to their group center, and then they trade out the shoe boxes, and actually the shoebox rotate more than the students. Or if you have the room, you could have stations set up around your room with stationary centers the students actually go and visit. So once again, it depends on what works best for you and your students, how your room is arranged as far as how much room you have in your room. I know that sounds kind of redundant, but it's how much space you have to set up those centers. Another thing is that a lot of people forget is introducing new centers to students. When you rotate out the centers, you need to take that first day to teach them what they're supposed to be doing in the centers. For example, if I have this game in a pickle in one of my centers, and I just set it there, are my kids going to play it correctly? Are they going to get what I want them to get out of it? No, they're going to look at it and say, oh, wait, look, what's inside? Ooh, we have cards inside. Sorry, dropped the directions there. And how are we going to use these cards? Well, I don't know. Let's put all the C words together. Well, that's really not what we want them to do in this center, in this particular center with this game. And yes, the instructions are in there, but what even teenager is going to take the time to correctly read the directions and follow the instructions? Very few of them. So you really have to go over the expectations. And when I do centers in my room, along with going over the expectations, in the center, I have directions with 3 or 4 simple steps. And depending on the reading level, you might incorporate pictures into the directions. And it tells them exactly what they're supposed to be doing in that center. So that if they forgot, because I explained this on Monday and they don't actually go to that center until Thursday, if they forgot how to play it, the directions are sitting out for them in that center. So you need to take the time to introduce the new centers, just like we took the time to set up the rules and the routines and expectations of centers. Teacher groups. During your center time, which is also your RTI time, you should be working with students. You should be working with a small group. Now, when I'm working with my students at my horseshoe table and the rest of my students are in centers, my kids know that the only reason that they should interrupt me without me calling on them is if there is an emergency. And an emergency is not Joey took Susie's folder. I have gone through this with them on my expectations on when they interrupt me. There's a square at the end of my horseshoe table that they can stand and wait quietly in. And when I get to a stopping point, I will ask them what they want. But we also have a rule established that a lot of teachers I know use, and it's called 3 before me. They have to ask 3 of their center mates or group mates the question. And if they can't find an answer, then they come stand in the square and they ask me. That way, it limits the distractions and the interruptions of my teacher group. So, now that we've covered all this information and I've given you a lot to think about, I want you to turn and talk to your elbow partner. I want you to talk about how you think your centers are going to look in your classroom, what you would like them to look at. Talk about some of your concerns about setting up centers in your classroom. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to share your information with each other, and then we'll come back. Okay, while you guys were turning and talking, I was walking around the room and answering some of your questions and concerns. I know that you have a lot of questions, and we really don't have a whole lot of time today. So what I've done is I've set up a parking lot. I've set up a graph paper on the wall over there by the door. I want you to write your questions down, and I want you to put them on sticky, because what I'm going to do is I'll compile those into a Word document and answer them as best as I can, and then I'll shoot an email out to all of you so you all have that information. You all have my contact information, so that shouldn't be a problem. Alright, so we've done our turn and talk. Now, this is a simple example. Would I do this in my centers? Probably not, unless I was testing their fine motor skills, because making some of those shapes and those drawings actually has a lot to do with handwriting and fine motor. So yes, all this would be a fun center because we're drawing the first shape, the second, and we're adding on. It actually helps develop those fine muscles in their hands that deal with handwriting and the cursive and the loops and all that. So it actually is an academic center. It could be a writing center, especially for younger children, kindergarten, first grade, where they're first starting that development, to help strengthen those muscles. So when you're doing centers directions, like we talked about, because we're not just going to set the game in the center after we explained it to them on Monday. We're not just going to set it out there and expect them to follow the rules. We're actually going to have printed directions for them. When you print those directions, they need to be based on your student's reading level. If you're teaching preschool, your directions, although you're going to have words, your directions are going to be very simple, and they're going to have pictures on the top of every word to help the child understand. It's going to be something very simple based for them. It's going to be on their reading level, where if I have a 5th grader, chances are I'm not going to have any pictures on their directions. It's going to be all words. So it's going to be based on their reading level. It's going to be very easy to understand. Directions shouldn't be a paragraph. They should be one simple sentence. Get a pencil. Follow drawing. That would be my directions for this. And then under the drawing, I would have a picture of this laminated for the children. So they need to be easy, based on their reading level, easy to understand. They need to include illustrations. If you have something very technical such as this you want to do, you're not going to tell them, draw an oval, draw a small circle on the right-hand side of the oval. Okay, that gets too confusing, so have the illustration to go with it. They're short and simple, like I said, not a whole paragraph. Now we're going to take 2 minutes. I want you to see how easy this direction is to follow. You have your Post-it notes, you have your pencils. You try. Draw me a penguin. Okay, like me, some of you are not very good artists, but you could follow this. This is very simple directions. So even though art isn't your, what's the word? Sorry, lost it. In your forte, isn't your strength, you could still follow along with the directions. So moving on, because I know we're getting close to time, and I promised you I would not keep you more than 20 minutes. So I'm going to speed it up a little bit so you can get back to your rooms. Got a couple examples here for you. This would be a center that I use actually in my life skills class, and that you could use in 1st grade, 2nd grade, because there is reading, but there's also pictures. They're matching the singular noun, berry, with the berries. So even if they can't read the words, they can still match the pictures. For this, my directions for my students would be based on their abilities again. I might have them match the words and then pick out their 5 favorite matches and write them. That way I'm doing the reading, I'm doing the handwriting, and we're still getting the grammar as far as singular and plural. So that's one example. Another one I have is actually prefix links, prefix and suffix links. They have things such as belief is a root word. What would we add to that? In the front, I could add miss for misbelief. Is that really a word? I don't know. They'd have to look it up. So and reheat. So they would create either prefixes with the root word or suffixes. For example, activeness, painted, and then they would write down the 5 words they created using a prefix and the 5 words they created using a suffix. This way, they have the hands-on materials, they're having fun, they have their partners to help keep them in check on whether they're real words or not. They also have a dictionary. And once again, they're working on their writing skills, which we know all of our children need to work on. Oh goodness, letter tiles. There's so many things we can do with this, especially for younger children. Having their sight words for the week or their 10 spelling words, and then they have to find the letter tiles and match it up on the spelling words and copy it. Great way to practice that. We're working on reading fluency. You might have them draw 10 tiles and see how many words they can create out of those 10 tiles and write them on a sheet of paper. We already talked about in a pickle. Oh, and in my office, I have my centers book that I got when I attended SFA. Has all the way from pre-K to 4th grade centers. Each page tells you not only what the objective or skill is, the materials you need, and it gives you a breakdown on what the directions in the center should say. Kind of no-brainer, you're just recreating it. Don't have to invent the wheel, sometimes we just have to recreate it. So that's always in my office for you guys to use. I think we're just about out of time. So real quick, I'm going to give you, let's go ahead and do 2 more minutes. Stop, turn to your partner, we're going to do a think, pair, share. I want you to think about some of the ideas we came up with. And think of 1 or 2 centers of your own that you could use based on the skills your kids are working on now and share it with your partner. Go. You guys have some really good ideas on how to develop centers for your room. Centers don't have to be all that involved as far as creating. It's taking the materials you have and using them in a new way for your children to give them a hands-on activity, really, to help making learning a little more enjoyable. So, with that, let's go to our closing. Are there any questions other than what's been posted on the board? Because I know I've gone a little bit over my time and I don't want to take your whole conference time. Comments or concerns? No? All right. Well, that's all, folks. Thank you very much for your attention and have a great day.